So now we move to the next panel. Actually, let's say it's a blockbuster panel. Singh is going to be moderating the panel, and Jag is one of the most prominent angel investors in Europe. He was last managing director for Techstars in Berlin, and is probably the most ideal person to fit this Asia Berlin profile. He's originally from Asia, but has lived a lot in the Western markets and is now living in Berlin. So he's really traveled extensively and also worked extensively in the Asian, European, and the American markets. And without further ado, I introduce Jag on stage, who will then introduce the other panelists to all of you as well. So welcome, Jag, and a big round of applause, please, for Jag Singh.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me all right? Amazing. There's 4 of us in person, and I think 1 or 2 more.
2 people joining online.
So without further ado, I'm just going to this is going to be hopefully a fun event where we're going to try and make it as interactive as possible. And we've got like $1 billion worth of like assets under management. And that's just Song over there, right? So I want to make sure that we get as much time for you to ask questions. We've got about an hour. I'm going to very quickly introduce the illustrious panelists here. So first we've got Song. Song's passionate about opportunities in the healthcare sector and believes in both the immense value creation potential through digital technologies, as well as the resulting positive impact on society. He's a partner here in Berlin for Digital Health Ventures, and previously led the Berlin office and its investments for Samsung Catalyst. He also helped set up the Allianz X Fund. So, Song, welcome.
Hi, thank you very much.
Then we've got Rabab. Rabab is part of the health investment team at Earlybird Venture Capital. They're one of the leading European investors. If you don't already know them, you have to absolutely know them. She's got an academic background supported by a PhD in regenerative medicine, and has also spent 3 years as a postdoc fellow in Cambridge. She's born in Australia, which is the forgotten part of Asia, and also spent a long time in Lebanon, which is another forgotten part of Asia. We often forget about Southwest Asia. She's worked across the UK in multiple roles, Australia as an incubator program manager, and now in Germany as an investor. So welcome, Rabab. And in person again, we've got James Song. So James is an investor at APX, a very early stage VC investor here in Berlin, and he's responsible for sourcing, managing the existing portfolio companies, as well as selecting new companies. So if there are any startup founders, very early stage startup founders, James is going to be your man to talk to. He studied politics and economics in the UK at UCL, and then moved to Berlin a couple of years ago. Here's a fun fact, though. James actually was an artist before he became a VC, and prior to moving to Berlin, he had his work exhibited at Berlin Art Week last year, I believe. So, welcome, James. And on the screen, we've got Ben and Tony. I'll very quickly introduce Tony first. So Tony is a fellow Asia Berlin ambassador. He's an entrepreneur, investor, and film producer headquartered in Hong Kong, but has commuted between Europe and Hong Kong for over a decade now. He activates his urban tech with impact thesis with the Greater Bay X and carbonless investment and innovation platforms. He's essentially working on cross-border urban tech and decarbonization-focused investment. So again, if you're in that sector, Tony is your man to talk to. And last but not least, we've got Ben from SOSV. So Ben is a partner, and he focuses on the global deep tech side. He manages over $1 billion in capital and is investing in over 100 pre-seed startups each year. Ben was born in France, which you could argue is part of Asia these days, but has worked for over 18 years across Asia, including Shenzhen and in Silicon Valley on hardware. So welcome, Ben and Tony. Okay, so I promised we're going to make this as painless as possible and as fun as possible, but just to get the ball rolling and just to get the excitement and exhilaration and adrenaline flowing, I'm going to ask the panelists questions around the geographies that they have previously invested in, and also the geographies that they might have found like a nightmare to invest in previously, but have now found to be improving. And the context for this question is, I think in the last year, we've all seen how many of these startup ecosystems around the world, not just Berlin, but some in far-flung areas, including Melbourne, Australia, have actually leapfrogged some of the larger, more established ecosystems. I think if you look at the per capita, the number of entrepreneurs per capita in places like the Canary Islands, it far surpasses places like Silicon Valley. So, question for Rabab, for example. You've now worked across a whole bunch of regions, and then we'll come to Min Sung. You've worked across these regions. What are you seeing as the big shift? How are you witnessing this shift?
I think there's, everyone can hear me okay? I think there's a lot of change happening in places like Australia, for example. I mean, over the last 20 years, it's been fairly difficult for people to scale their companies. It's been very difficult to get money, capital into the country or help people grow their companies. And you see this changing a lot with ecosystems coming together because we're quite fragmented and have been for a long time, and we're taking learnings from places like the UK and Germany, etc., and trying to build this place to be a bit more collaborative. I think a big part of it is trying to instill a sense of entrepreneurship, which doesn't always exist in these places because they're rather fragmented. So I think this is really changing.
And just to clarify for the whole audience, now I think we can all hear ourselves.
Yeah.
Just to clarify for the whole audience, what are the geographies that Earlybird invests in?
So we invest in Europe in particular. In fact, probably Western Europe primarily. We haven't invested in Eastern Europe, and this is now becomes a lot more interesting because, for very traditional healthcare, infrastructure has to exist, and very good infrastructure. Now coming into the digital health space, this becomes less of a problem, and we have a lot less cost associated with building companies, and going to Eastern Europe makes these companies grow a lot quicker with a lot less capital, and this is a fantastic opportunity at the moment, I believe.
Okay. Min Sung, tell us a little bit about digital health ventures and where you're investing, and then also...
Yes, hi. Okay, no, yeah, okay. I don't look like it, but I'm actually, I was born in Germany, in Hamburg, so this is like a harbor city, two hours away from here. My parents are from Korea, that's why I used to work for Samsung and also set up the Allianz X fund there. I did late stage investments and growth stage investments. Today, setting up the second generation of our fund. We are still investing with our first fund, but we are raising the second fund now, specialized in digital health. And back in my days at Allianz and Samsung, we invested worldwide. What surprised me and what was shifting, I think, is basically that we saw that in China, how you scale up companies, it's happening so fast, and something where what I kind of like miss a little bit in our European ecosystem. Of course, we have unicorns in Sweden and in Germany and in the UK. However, the knowledge, people that understand how to scale up a company, there are still a few. So this knowledge is slowly spreading across the ecosystem, and that's, I think, also why the valuations are so much higher in China and in the US. So basically, that what surprised me most is basically what kind of power China has to stamp out companies overnight and just grow. Yeah? So one of my bosses said once that China reminds him a lot of Korea in the 90s and 2000s. Yeah? They are very hungry. They are working overnight, and it's scary. Yeah?
I can only imagine what would happen if we tried to introduce the 996 concept here in Germany. For those of you who are not familiar, 996 is one of those principles of how long you should work each day for how many days a week. Again, good luck getting that past the Betriebsrat. But I want to take this to Tony in a second, because Rabab just mentioned Eastern Europe, and Tony, you've got some experience there. But just before that, Min Sung, the previous, the keynote speaker earlier, Boji, mentioned that, from his perspective, China was all about execution. Do you think that's all it is, or is there a little bit more to it? Because surely, Europe's been pretty good at executing.
Yeah, but I think it's also about people who can handle growth. And I'm not talking about the slow growth. And I think Europe has basically, venture capital in general is the amount of venture capital is lower than, for instance, in China and in the US. So if you have a lot of money that gets pumped into a company, the people that are working in that company are getting trained. They know how to they see growth, how you grow revenue 3 times over a month. And I think handling that growth and not losing it, and then going to become an industry leader, I think this is some experience that the ecosystem here in Europe is still lacking because there was not so much venture capital in the past.
Right.
So the amount of money you have to think about that is also when we invest in early stage, we're training the founders because we give them money so they can learn. So basically it's the same thing when Tiger Global or SoftBank drops a load to a company, the whole company and all the people, they are learning how to handle growth, how to manage growth. And this knowledge gets then passed on to other companies later on.
Of course. One of my favorite stats that I love to throw at politicians whenever they talk about trying to replicate the Silicon Valley model outside is I remind them when Facebook went public, they created 3 million millionaires overnight. Sorry, they created 3,000 millionaires overnight, who then went back and invested into early stage companies in their surrounding areas. So this is one of those situations where the power law really applies.
Yeah, I mean we see it all the time. When we are passing early stage, and then when the company hits product market fit and then go to market, then sometimes the CEO is not the right person anymore. Although the company is growing really fast, and sometimes you realize, okay, the company now, go-to-market company, has a different need and does need different leadership. And then basically everybody thinks about Mark Zuckerberg, right? So he founded Facebook and then, became a very big hit and then it became public and he's still the CEO. But I think, this is really, really difficult to achieve actually, because each stage from product market fit to go to market and then industry leader, you need to unlearn as a CEO certain patterns because the organization demands different things. So as an investor, when you look at the CEO and see like the CEO is not the right one and he doesn't want to step down, as a VC, you start thinking about selling the company.
Right. I'm just going to take it to Tony first because Tony's been itching to jump in there on that conversation. Tony, you've now been doing this. The parts of Europe that Rabab, Minsung, and I haven't been talking about that much, including Eastern Europe. Tell us a little bit more about your experience. What are you seeing, and how is that changing in the last 12, 18 months?
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me well? Just to check the tech.
Loud and clear.
Okay, very good, very good. Good to see everyone in the room, and it's a pleasure to be here. Just full disclosure, we haven't been focusing on Eastern Europe from an investment thesis perspective. I am from Hungary indeed, and I always try to keep an open mind and positively discriminate Eastern Europeans, because I know how hard it is to be an entrepreneur in those countries and in those markets, and how hard it is to grow overseas. But I think what is happening in Eastern Europe is pretty universal, and it has been mentioned before already on this panel, that the ecosystems universally, globally, all over the world are just developing. And there's more capital in Europe, including Eastern Europe. There's more talent, the know-how of how to build companies, how to build regional leaders, vertical leaders, how to scale globally. Is now accessible, through various ecosystems, through various platforms, through the global international investor community. So there are a couple of great examples in Eastern Europe, but there are a couple of great examples elsewhere. And I think I need to talk about Hong Kong, since that's where I'm sitting right now. And obviously it is the Asia Berlin Summit. So I would like to bring some color from here and just to highlight how true that is also for Hong Kong, because a couple of years ago, when Ben and I were sitting at the entrepreneur club that I established, and Ben was a member, I believe, if I remember correctly, we were talking about when will the first unicorn of Hong Kong come about. It was about 5, 6, 7 years ago, and we couldn't guess which company that would be. And now Hong Kong has 8 to 10 unicorns, depends on the definition and how people are evaluating the various companies. But that happened over the past 5 years, pretty much, and it's across sectors. So it's exciting. I think it's exciting everywhere, wherever I look, and that includes Eastern Europe. What I like about Eastern Europe, that it's an area, or it's a region where entrepreneurs tend to have some kind of inferiority complex because the markets are relatively small. They speak languages that no one else speaks around the world, and with an accent that very few people actually understand. It's actually not sexy to be from Eastern Europe, but when it comes to tech talent, the entire world recognizes that Eastern Europeans are great and provide great products and output at a good value for money ratio. And I think the global recognition for that and the self-confidence about that has been boosting these ecosystems to build on that foundation. So that's what I can tell about Eastern Europe. And we see a couple of great examples for leading companies or promising companies. Now, I don't know whether we would like to put the Baltic countries as under the Eastern European umbrella, but obviously Estonia is a unique example there, and an example I really like and like to bring up at various conversations.
Yeah, for sure. Now, Carbonless has a more of an APAC focused, right?
Yeah.
And Greater Bay X is obviously focused on the Bay Area and in the US. How do you?
No, it's focused on the Greater Bay Area here in southern China. I need to highlight that. I can explain, but please finish your question.
So southern China is like Silicon Valley, same thing, right? Like these days, it's the new Silicon Valley, but that's a horrible save. Never mind. But to finish the point about the APAC-wide kind of focus, how are you seeing founders from the wider region? I know you appreciate you talked about Hong Kong a little bit, but from the slightly, if you zoomed out from the map a little bit, are there similar trends happening that you're seeing on the ground there, or is there a clear front runner, a clear leader in this market? We previously had panelists from Malaysia and Indonesia who were also kind of saying similar things, and basically from the European view, it looks like these markets, these emerging markets, are now actually they're no longer just frontier markets. They're actually the markets where we really need to be as European founders, as European investors. How do you see that across the whole region? Not just talking about China, Hong Kong, southern China and Hong Kong.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And obviously, when it comes to Asia Pacific, there are a couple of different definitions. In our carbonless definition, Asia Pacific spans from the Middle East all the way to and we include Australia and Oceania. Even if we didn't include Australia and Oceania, it's a huge region, extremely diverse region. So we cannot just say where the region is, because every single market is pretty much on a different trajectory. We can highlight that Southeast Asia is developing in a similar pattern, according to a similar pattern, similar pace. It's very exciting what's happening in Southeast Asia. Definitely, as you mentioned, it's not frontier anymore. There are some exciting startups, ecosystems, and active investor community in every single market that we can think of. Obviously, Singapore is leading the way in Southeast Asia. They have been very consistently and consciously and smartly investing in becoming the destination for international capital, international tech companies, and startup founders. They built a pretty impressive ecosystem there. When it comes to who's leading the pack, obviously China has to be highlighted. China is on an absolutely different level compared to anyone else. Yeah. But I think some of the interesting, I would just drop three interesting notes. Japan has been highlighted, I think over the past decade as a place where innovation R&D is world class and globally renowned, but the startup ecosystem and the startup ecosystems just didn't get going. Now it's also changing in Japan. India, I think, is in an amazing trajectory, and it's obviously nothing new to say. But the capital in Asia Pacific, with the difficulties around China and the question marks for some investors around China, much more attention and capital has been directed towards India. Obviously, it's a huge market with extreme growth potential, great talent. And you mentioned Lebanon as one of those markets in APAC that no one ever talks about. And I think that region and those markets, and I would just like to highlight a personal experience from Saudi Arabia when I was there, talked to founders about 1.5 years ago. Very impressive startups are emerging. The investor ecosystem and activity is increasing. So I think it's happening across the board. Different markets are at different stages, but once again, entrepreneurship, technology, ecosystems are proliferating everywhere.
For sure. I'm going to bring Ben in, but just kind of reference. We're basically talking about Min Sung's point earlier about how experience needs to be translated across cultures and almost injected into some of these new ecosystems. Ben, you've now been doing this for a while in different jurisdictions and geographies. How are you seeing this? What are you seeing? Tell us what you think.
About the difference in ecosystems?
Sure, yeah.
Well, I think a lot has been said already. I'd say from our perspective, so just to give some reference, so we manage about $1 billion. We have about 1,000 startups in portfolio and invest in about 100 new deals every year, particularly at pre-seed through our accelerator programs. And one of them focused on the hard tech is based in Shenzhen. And the reason to base it in Shenzhen was to have access to the supply chain and the ecosystem for developing prototyping and production. So to your question about the differences of the jurisdiction, essentially you have US that's very mature, and then everyone else trying to sort of align and also coming up with their own things. China is generally an inspiration for many developing markets. I think a lot of what you see in India can be sourced in China rather than the US. A lot of what you see in Indonesia can be sourced in both India and China as well. In terms of jurisdiction, for us, it doesn't really create a whole lot of differences in terms of how we do deals. We enter at pre-seed and we generally adapt to whatever they have, knowing that mostly things get redone either at the seed or at Series A when paperwork is cleaner. So it's not really a huge barrier. Like I said, anything on the legal aspect is not really a huge barrier. What's more of a barrier is the ecosystem and the safety nets for entrepreneurs. I think actually that's something that's not really talked about, but one thing that stimulates ecosystems is whether or not it's risky or not for founders to fail. And in the US, it's like a little bit like fish in the water. If you're a founder, excuse me, I'm gonna get a bit of tea. If you're a founder, your company fails, very quickly you find another job. But it's certainly not the case in many other locations where there can be a stigma associated to failure that can jeopardize your career and your finances for a really long time. And so I think for me, the best metric for the potential of a market is the fluidity of the job market. And that's something that's a little bit hard to measure and rarely talked about, but that's really important. I think that's about. I'm not exactly sure I answered your question, but those are like
I think that's
ideas I wanted to share.
No, absolutely, and I think you actually set James up to talk about that because.
I actually want to return to your first point about what ecosystems are exciting and why, and also a point mentioned earlier about Estonia. So, for context, APX is a European-focused VC. And if we're on the topic of exciting ecosystems, I think the Baltics, especially Estonia, is so exciting because of the flywheel effect you just mentioned earlier, where what the success of one company can lead to the success of many others. So in Estonia's case, it was Skype, and then it led on to the early hires of Skype. Then ended up founding other unicorns such as Pipedrive and Bolt, and now the ecosystem's so strong that they've actually. So it's actually in Europe the highest unicorn per capita country, so they have 8 to a population size of just 1 million, and then Germany it's 19 for 60 million, 80 million. So that's really surprising. And then on the point of Central and Eastern Europe, one thing that I find really particularly interesting is the tech talent, and the tech talent that comes from having worked at large corporations, maybe from the West, that have headquarters in Eastern Europe. What I found through screening a lot of deals is the founder profiles typically have discovered problems by working through these large corporations and try and find enterprise solutions and spin out their own products, having experienced this. Another point on Central and Eastern Europe is I think a lot of large or scale-ups in very mainstream industries such as health and beauty are still afraid for some reason to enter these markets, maybe due to the fragmentation. A case we looked and invested in recently is a simple booking platform for beauty appointments and hair appointments. Obviously, Treatwell and Booksy are huge players in this space, but they haven't entered the Eastern European market, especially the Balkans. So that's where we see a lot of potential as well in these mainstream cases where large and more successful startups haven't entered the Eastern European market. So yeah, that's just a couple of thoughts.
I want to go back to your point, and I'm going to ask the audience here if you have any questions after this. So start thinking about if you have any questions for this panel. But just on that point about these ecosystems helping spur and really develop more startups. Isn't London the kind of clear leader here in Europe, given that actually the first time I met Tavit and Jan from Skype, they were actually in London, right? Like they built most of Skype in London. The second company that they built, TransferWise, was in London. Isn't there a natural draw towards these larger ecosystems from your experience?
The only kind of observation that I can mention is London, obviously the number of deals are the highest in Europe, and also the size of the deals the highest in Europe, and I think that may remain there for a few years to come. But in elsewhere in Europe, especially in Berlin, we're seeing a lot of very grassroots startup ecosystems emerging, and through that, the number of deals are beginning to rise. So long story short, the reason why Berlin excites me so much is because there's so much growth potential, and you see this on an everyday level. Events such as this and many others spurring the next wave. And I think we've seen that especially over the pandemic, where startups like Gorillas, who recently raised 900 million, and many others have been born in the past couple of years. So that's my observation.
No, I can attest that. There's obviously three of us are not from Berlin, and we're now in Berlin, and then there's Min Sung, who's now a second generation Berliner, a true Berliner. Let's ask the audience if they have some questions. Otherwise, I've got some that I can lob at them. So I'm going to take 3 questions at a time, just so that we can cover across the panelists. So raise your hand. Just wait a second, the mic's on your way.
Hi, I'm Tina. Thanks, Jag. It's a fantastic panel, and I'm really having a fantastic time. Question number 1, how important do you think is the role of users at the stage of product market fit, and as you look at investment opportunities? And yeah, so I just wanted to know that, because there's a follow-up question for you to for me to understand. So I'm the co-founder of Useristics, which basically we help startups to understand these users better, so they can build products and services that their users can't live without. And we kind of spoke to some very early stage founders, and I asked them, would you like to join our cohort so that they can learn how to talk to users? And one of the answers we got was their investors kind of said no, because they wanted them to focus on execution. So I would love to hear your point of view on this one.
Okay, I have a lot of emotions on that, but we'll come back to that, and I want to get the panelists to answer that as well. Anyone else with a question? I want to take 3 at a time, just so that we can cover more. In the back, Chica.
Hi, I'm Chica. Thank you for the great panel. My question is that, so during the pandemic, lots of VCs needed to try to find startups online only because it was not able to travel. So now, like before pandemic, location was super important. Who you are connected physically was important. Do you think now, as an VC, is it like the game for everybody who can reach to the good, startups through internet, or still like, location and things like that's gonna be matter in the future?
So if I could just restate the question, it's basically, does location matter now that we've all lived our lives behind a screen? Is that it? Okay. And the first question was essentially how important are users to the equation in a very early stage startup? Is that right? Okay. Min-Sung, you've been a founder. I'm gonna throw it right at you. Back me up here. How important are users, and especially talking to users?
I just wanted to answer Chika's question.
Okay, you can answer
because
that.
I think, today is a wonderful time for fundraising. There's so much money in the market. I mean, the Fed might, raise the interest, and then, all the, I think more investments will shift towards bonds again and savings. But look at Zoom. Yeah, that's so funny because you can just do Zoom meetings, 1 hour or 30 minutes. You don't need to fly to London. You don't need to fly to Berlin. You don't need to fly to Vienna. We are currently raising also our fund. And usually it was like this. Also when I was a founder, 30 minutes, you go to the meeting. And then you have a coffee for 1 hour, and then you drive 30 minutes back. And then it's the worst thing is actually when you actually got there, and then the investor says, "Oh, I don't invest in funds. I only do direct investments." And then you sit there, and then you have to drink a coffee for 1 hour, but you lost 2 hours, and you can only do two meetings on the Nachmittag here in the afternoon. Yeah, but today with Zoom, you can schedule 30 minutes meetings, back to back, and basically fundraise. And when the investors say, "Hey, I like that, really would love to invite you to the meeting," then you fly over. And even that during the pandemic was wonderful. You didn't fly to London, you didn't fly to Vienna and pitch in front of the investment committee. After a week, they say, yeah, no. And then the whole day was basically wasted. So the fundraising process was much more, how do you call that? Efficient, as the Germans love it. Users, super important. Yeah, what can I say? I think especially when you're in early stage and when you look for product market fit, I think at the beginning you need to definitely define the problem. And if you are the best company that is grasping the problem or can articulate the problem the best, that makes you, how do you call that? Start a slow gravity between attracting talent, because your mission is much more clearer, and also capital, because the investor sees, okay, he understands the industry problem. So that's why you usually have people that coming from the industry and really understand the industry and what the problem is. Because if you say oh yeah, we are, one founder, he said basically, oh yeah, we are addressing 2 or 3 problems. But that for me, it means you haven't found the real problem yet. And again, when you give money to them, it's basically, fueling their learning journey. And so the question as an investor is when do you deploy the money at the right time? Because when you deploy it, then the clock is ticking for you as an investor, and you don't want to invest too early where the company is trying to find the problem 6 months, and then they're out of cash, and then oh, we need more money because we haven't found the problem, and you're okay, maybe this was my.
Can I jump in here?
James, you have to answer
I think that's very enlightening. But to answer the question about remote work, and especially in investing, the biggest challenge for early stage investors is, well, to any investors, but specifically very early stage, is access to deals. And the reason why as APX we're now on the hunt for, let's say, for the whole of Europe, is because it's easy to do so. People are so ready to network, to engage, so much so that I would say my strongest contacts in early stage VC I've never actually met in real life, and I don't think I ever will. But it's important to, number one, to engage, if you want to engage in the market. So in my case, I've been trying to experience and network into the Bulgarian and Romanian ecosystems. You need to, in order to participate, you need to engage first and learn. And really, it's so easy as if you're attending a virtual event, finding their name, finding them on LinkedIn, reaching out. Boom, one intro call could, if you hit it off, you hit it off. And I'm a huge believer of this remote first, especially at very early stage investing. And then the first point about users. I just think in my experience seeing very early stage founders, they're trying to scale before they've even really found the value that they're trying to bring in. In a lot of cases, it's just we've done 10 user interviews, and now we want to scale. We need X amount to build this product, and often we say, well, 10 is not enough. Why 10? And it depends on the industry, but typically it's not also about the quantity. It's about how they've gone and done it. I'd be curious to know. Maybe we speak after about how you really test founders and really challenge them. So yeah, I'm excited.
I want to pull in Rabab to talk a bit more about the healthcare space in a second, just because that's different, right? Like if you're in an early stage healthcare startup, you're in a regulated environment, geography matters, where you start matters. And just before that, I just want to, if there are any founders, well, actually there are loads of founders here, I recognize some faces, and I'm sure there's a whole bunch listening. Your job as an early stage founder is to build the startup according to the needs of your customers, not the needs of your investors. And on that point, you should not be trying, you shouldn't be spending more time, you shouldn't be optimizing the whole process to speak to investors. You should be speaking to as few investors as possible so that you don't waste time. Most investors will say no because they probably can't invest in your geography. They can't invest in your sector. Investors, and as a partner in a fund, I can attest to this. We have contracts with our investors, our LPs, that specify we can't invest in certain geographies. We can't invest in some areas. So these are things that you need to know, and these are things that luckily you can find out very easily without having to waste time, as Min-Sung said, without having to waste time and going for a coffee and meeting with them. You should already know what an investor's thesis is before you have a conversation with them. Because when you have that conversation, all you need to do is just present your best parts, and it should be a go, no-go as early as possible. Again, I meet so many founders who waste so much time pitching and repitching to investors. So stay clear of that path. But Rabab,
I'll start with the time aspect.
Yeah.
I agree it saves a lot of time and you have much more time to spend speaking to a lot of companies, etc. But perhaps, and so this has been said already, and this is true, but I do think there is an aspect to meeting people. I mean, like today, I've been part of a lot of virtual meetings, and it's very different to be in a place where others exist and you can have a quick chat with them afterwards or meet later, and this is a big part of it. There is a time-saving aspect, but perhaps it has taught us to be a bit more efficient, and I think efficiency is great. I think on the geography aspect, yes, we can source a lot more deals from a lot of places and it makes our life a lot easier. But in terms of healthcare companies where they exist is very important. Let's say, a very simple example, R&D tax incentives, finding the right people because you need an actual location. This is separate to digital health, real therapeutics, let's say platform technologies, etc. This becomes very important and companies have to really consider where they want to be. And for us as an investor, it's also rather important. I think going to the user aspect, probably I would say yes, but the issue I think with early stage healthcare companies, at least the very real therapeutics core type of companies, I think the user comes in, it's a very different type of user. And therefore, but there is a user who, for example, let's say in cardiology, it's a cardiac surgeon who says, no, I do not want to use that device. And this really matters into adoption. And the company has to understand this very early on. And I think it really plays a very important role as well.
Cool. Satisfied with the answers? All right, next. Who's got more questions? Just one second, there's a mic coming. And then anyone else?
Microphone, excellent. Good. No. Actually, let me introduce myself. We produce vending machine that cook fresh hot dogs. So it automates cooking. Okay.
Cooks fresh hot dogs.
Yes, that's the question. Here's the question, hot dog. And I want to know, would you just invest in a company that is automating hot dog cooking process? Or are you really interested in companies that promote healthy food? For example, because if we compare, look at the market, McDonald's has got a big share in the market, right? It's a successful company. Would the idea hold you back, the idea of not very healthy food, hold you back from investing? Even if the company would have big success.
Good question. We'll come to that. The gentleman behind you had a question. Right.
So thank you very much also for the people online, just to show my face. I would be, it's a follow-up questions to Chika questions. Would you invest in a startup without meeting the startup personally? Because before the pandemic, I heard from many investors, it's so important, personal impression, everything. Now I hear different things about Zoom meetings, whether you get a personal impression or not. Now I hear at least for the first rounds, probably it would be remotely possible. But would you invest in a startup without seeing him personally at no time? So just without seeing him, just on Zoom?
Cool. And then we'll take one more question over there, and then thank you for asking very pointed questions, by the way, because these are like all of us can answer that very easily. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I will introduce myself. I'm Dr. Yoshna Jain. I'm founder of HealthPrax. My first question is that as an investor, do you have any favorite in terms of what stage, ideation, MVP, MSP, or product in market, some user base, what is like, it may differ from one person to another, but is there any kind of favorite stage that investors are more interested in a particular company as compared to the other one? So that is my first question. And second question, a very, very basic question, and maybe in many people's mind. Yes, there's a lot of money in the market. There are so many investors. As much as we are looking for investors, they are also looking for the right people to invest in. How do I find out that who are the right set of 10, 15 people I should approach who are interested in my domain and my geography? How do I do that? Is there a formula, some cool. website? Somebody's working on this, guys. Yeah.
Yes, they are. Okay, so the way we're going to do this is I'm going to actually ask each member of the panel to answer the three first questions, and then we'll talk about best tips in terms of how to find investors. So the first question was, will you invest in a hot dog vending machine? So there's no green tech here. There's no.
Actually, if you don't mind, I feel fully qualified to answer this question.
Yes.
So the reason is that first we invest in a lot of automation and robotics. Also because personally, I actually invested as an angel in two food robotics companies. One is making pasta, and the other one is making basically woks, so you can cook all sorts of different things in there. If you're familiar with the company called Spice, it has some similarities, but much more compact. So to answer your question, food robotics, really interesting. Our fund has invested in 2 or 3 of those. One didn't do well, was making salads. Another one is much more promising, is making pizza. And it's making pizza in a way that is not using super expensive robot arms that I personally don't like to see in food automation, because they're too expensive, but has another system. It's a company called X Robotics. You can check them online, and they have a very clever way to avoid basically single point of failure in the process of making the pizza. So now about your question, I think food automation is really interesting. It's a sector that has a lot of problem with labor, a lot of problem with turnover, training, cost, hours of operations. So on a big picture view, it makes sense to invest in companies like this, but
the question is, would you invest in that?
It depends. So I'm getting to it. The devil's in the details. It depends whether, like how much your system costs. It depends on the size of the market. Personally, just personal opinion, I'm not super excited about hot dog because I don't think it's necessarily a huge market compared to some other things in terms of prepared food and hot food. You were mentioning now the fund itself, SOSV, might have a different opinion. I'm just one person here. So it could make sense depending on the size of the market. Now, you're talking about healthy food. You have to define a bit what you mean by that, because there's a lot of different definitions. Some people would argue that anything with meat is not healthy. That's where the world is trending with alternative protein. We actually also invested a lot in that category. But I would say potentially you might find investors who like that. We might like that, depending on how you do it, how much it costs, and what's your market. Some other investors, there's not a lot of, people don't really line up to invest in food robotics around the world. People don't like hardware in general. There's some investors who do, but the majority doesn't. So if you want to pitch such project, you have to identify who is not too afraid of hardware, and if you can also find like develop good and convincing unit economics, ideally through a pilot that you would run with a prototype you made, even if it doesn't scale, you could actually get a more convincing pitch. That's it for hot dogs.
All right, thanks, Ben. Tony, would you invest in a hot dog vending machine? Yes or no?
Well, no.
Okay.
Cool. And the reason why I'm saying that, because I'm absolutely not qualified, unlike Ben, so I didn't even want to comment, because it might be an amazing idea and company.
Yeah,
so I don't mean to demean,
no, of course, no. But this is the point, right? Like we don't want to waste founders' times, and so if a founder is asking us, will you invest, and we say no, then our job should be to move them along to the next person who might.
Yes, I just wanted to give a clarification why I say no. We just don't invest in.
So
this type
we've just met two investors, and both have done the classic investor thing. One has said it depends, and the other one has said, well, maybe if it might still be a good investment. So to the founders out there, this is the other thing you need to learn to understand. Investors hate saying no directly, because, well, at some point it'll come back and bite us in the behind, right? And so as a founder, I meet a lot of founders who say, oh, I just had this amazing meeting with this investor, and I think they're going to invest. And then I talk to the investor behind the scenes, and they're like, no, we hate that company. We hate the founder. We don't want to invest. So again, it's your job to as a founder to kind of decipher what investors say, bearing in mind that investors generally, so Tony did an amazing thing. He actually said no, right? Most investors won't say that. James, will you invest in a hot dog vending machine?
I would say yes. Personally, I think this would revolutionize my life, especially if we're talking ketchup and mustard and the whole shebang and fried onions on the top. Yes, but on a more serious note, I think I would want to understand the technology better. So obviously, hardware. I'm sure you're aware that a lot of investors stay away from it because of the high capex cost and then the years that it takes to fully go to market. On the flip side, if there is a narrative that you can tell that automation, for example, especially in food, is a growing, and I think it is, a growing market, and if you can insert yourself as potentially a scalable software player, understanding there will be a lot of robotics companies making all types of food, and maybe, for example, you have a proprietary computer vision, which is your own technology, that then you can license that out and scale that technology. I would be more interested in than just the vending machine and the hardware and how you reduce cost to production. I'd be more interested in the first kind of point. But more than happy to talk about hot dogs.
That's a good tip. Okay, cool. Rabab.
I will be very succinct. No, because healthcare and hot dogs don't really will not come together.
Healthy hot dogs.
Yeah,
healthy
maybe.
Yeah. Min-Sung, I'm guessing it's the same answer, but you never know.
No, I think, as an investor, it's also important to say no. I totally agree. Why? Because you need to spend your time with the opportunities that matter. Because when you have an opportunity, you really need to dig in and you need to understand it. And if you are you need to say really quick no in order to save the time for the founder, but also save your time. Because, again, you need to focus your time on the opportunities that you want to pursue.
Cool. I wouldn't invest in a hot dog vending machine. I would invest in a kebab vending machine, though. So I would. If it was kebabs, I would. Hot dogs, no. So now we can talk about that later. There we go. Okay.
Not too late to pivot, probably.
Also, please don't pivot based on what one investor says. Again. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing, same quick round with Rainer's question, which was around deploying capital in a virtual environment. I've invested over about $3 million in the last year without meeting a single founder. Actually, one of the questions that I'm grappling with right now is, do I actually need to meet them? Do I need to go fly out and hang out with them? My LPs, my partner in the fund, he's saying yes, we should, but it's a question that I'm grappling with myself. And so
I think it depends always, on either if you're the lead. If you're leading the round, then of course you need to see him. If you are a co-investor and you put a small ticket in, I think probably not really. But also it depends on how you feel comfortable towards your LP, right? I mean, if the company goes sideways and the company has to shut down, you need to explain your LP why. And if you haven't seen any risk beforehand or something like this. So I think, at the moment, all the digital companies or the startup companies early stage, they are doing very well. So I think at the moment there is not a big problem. I think when there are problems, and in early stage there are always problems, and you really need to, how do you call that, adjust, or you need to basically help the founders. I think then the real character shows. And I mean, there are a lot of VCs that tell me, like, hey, we've done this early stage deal and it was possible over Zoom, and get to know them over Zoom, blah blah blah. But when the company goes sideways, the question then, I think you have this lakmus test. Either you have judged the character in a right way or not. But you can only see that when, again, also with your co-founders, but also with your partners, etc. You see the real character when they are under stress.
What could be a greater stress than trying to build a relationship over Zoom?
Yeah, it's very difficult. Again, also with, I think I remember during the Corona crisis, I think it was last year, and it was in March. And we wanted to make that investment into Solaris Bank with Samsung Catalyst Fund. The lead pulled out, because of the Corona crisis. It was difficult to predict the capital calls and all that stuff. So for us it was super important to go there. And I had a very bad feeling actually going there to the office, but I thought it was very necessary to actually meet the founders, get the feeling for each other, because we were thinking about, or the option back then was to lead the round. And then if you want to convince your co-investors. And rally them behind your conviction and behind your investment thesis. You need to tell them that you have at least seen the company and met the CEO and shook hands, or bumped fist or something like this.
Rabab?
In fact, the last two investments that were done from the healthcare fund at Earlybird alone were virtual. That being said, we knew the founders from previous interactions. They were serial entrepreneurs. We knew them very well. So we had a very established relationship, and we were comfortable saying, okay, we would do this investment in this particular company. But I think we wouldn't, from an entrepreneur that we wouldn't know, that to say, yes, we will just close the deal, and we have not met them in person. Yeah.
James?
I would say, okay, is it important to meet founders? I think it's important, but do we and can we? The answer is no, because it simply just doesn't make sense. The model that we work under is we want to invest a lot into a lot of startups in a short amount of time. And if we were to meet every single one, we simply wouldn't be able to make as many deals. So that's the first one, or that's the main reason. And second of all, because of the pan-Europe focus, that also makes it very hard to invite all companies that we think are promising to come and see us. We're, as APX, remote first anyway in terms of our internal team, so we don't even see each other so often. So it doesn't make sense. But ideally, I would like to meet founders before we invest.
Ben?
We invest remotely all the time for about 10 years. So I think the one thing we want to see even more than the founders in person is generally their technology. Because we invest in a lot of hardware devices, we invest in biology. So we want to make sure the science and the technology is actually real and sound. So we generally require some kind of demo of the early prototypes so that we can get a sense of what's really working and evaluate if it's real.
Cool. Tony?
I gave a simple no answer for the previous question. I will say give a simple yes answer to this question.
That's perfect. It's okay. So we've got some founders very excited. Like I can see their faces already showing a lot of good emotion. So this is good. And to the last question, and we're going to wrap up in a couple of minutes. So I'm going to go to all the panelists and just ask them to just do a quick summary. If there anything they want to get across their chests for in a minute. The last question was mostly around how do I find the right investors and how do I filter out? Was that right? And what is the right stage? I think that's pretty easy enough for all of us to answer. We all have very specific stages that we invest in, whether you're an accelerator or whether you're an very early stage fund, or even if you're part of a bigger team but focusing on a specific vertical. I think that one's the easiest one because you find that on the websites. But how do you find those investors? For me, and I'd love the panelists to also kind of answer that. For me, it's always been about, as a founder, when I was fundraising, I just went out on looked at all the existing companies that had already raised money in a similar space that were not necessarily competitive, and found out who invested in them. So between Crunchbase, AngelList, PitchBook, Dealroom, there's no shortage of real-world intelligence out there in terms of who's already invested. What I would caveat is there are many funds that seem very interesting for a specific type of startup, but again, and from experience and having been an investor now for over 7 years, and I've probably done over 100 deals, the relationship with the partner is probably what makes that startup go up or down. The relationship with the fund, I mean, between the investment and the fund, there are so many great funds out there where there's a mismatch between the partner that's leading the deal and the company that's being invested in. And almost all those companies, you can ask them and they would have a very negative review of that fund. So again, your job is to find the right person, your job is not just to find the right fund, but also the right person within the fund who could get excited about the space that you're in. Min-Sung, anything to add?
I think the most important thing for you is to find the right list, and you have all the other founders, early stage founders in Berlin. They can basically say like, hey, do you have an investor list? Can I have that? And basically you just go down the list. I think research is a very, very, very important task that people, tend to neglect. I think when I was a founder, I was like, I went to the conference and just talked to random people. That's like the worst approach. So the thing is like, ask your fellow founders, ask them about a list, that are currently in your stage. If you're early stage, talk to early stage founders. If you are in a growth stage company, then talk to growth stage founders and ask them about an investor list that they made, and then get something together, and then LinkedIn is so beautiful at the moment, So because of the pandemic, all the people are on LinkedIn now because this was the only way how to connect with the ecosystem. So now you just type in the names of the VC firms, and then you see like a second or third mostly second connection, and then you ask for introductions. Always ask for introduction, and then 30-minute calls, bam, 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 bam. And then you say like, hey, we're doing this. Is it exciting? Blah, blah. And when they say like, no, not really, then you're like, okay, 30 minutes, next one. And then when you identify a short list of like, certain companies and that want to invest in your company. And this is where you start the funnel conversion, the mid-funnel conversion. But the long lists, getting the list is super important because this is always stuffing your top funnel, and it's your time or your not decision, sorry, it's your task to do the right research, because this is how you save time. Again, time, energy is super precious, because when you fundraise, you need to be 120%, because only 100% will actually get there at the investor. So when you only give 100 or 80%, the investor will only see 80 to 60% of your energy, and you need to be enthusiastic. Yeah? So this is why you need to save your time and your energy.
Yeah, I think a lot has been said there, and that's very true. I think something that really works very well is getting a referral from an investor you've spoken to who's very enthusiastic about your idea, but says it doesn't fit for whichever reason, geography, etc. And they can refer you, because the investor network, similar to the entrepreneur network, is quite well knit, and they can probably refer you. And when it comes like this, I think it carries some weight as well. So
I would just add that in my experience, the best warm referral for an investor comes from a founder that they've already backed in before, right? So I get a lot of investors pitching me a deal, and in most cases, I have to think behind the logic and go, actually, why are they selling me this deal? Is it because they got in at a super early price and now they want just someone else to come in? It's a Ponzi scheme, right, for many people. But actually, a founder that I've already backed, someone I've already spent time with, whether it's on Zoom or in real life, someone I've already invested a lot of capital in, I really trust that person. And if they come to me and say, hey, like, I think there's this one founder, you should meet her, like, she's really cool, and I don't quite understand the space, but she has like all the right signals, energy, I'm going to take that meeting. I'm going to prioritize that meeting over a meeting from another investor.
Yeah, I would back up that point and also go one step further to understand how that investor can be the right partner. So in our case, we have corporate partners who have access to, for example, the media world. And if you're a startup, maybe not so associated to the media world, but you can make a case for why that would be, in our case, Axel Springer would be a great partner for you, I think that really shines through in our interactions, and it means that the founder has gone a step further to persuade us to invest. So I think that's
cool.
my 2 cents.
Ben, Tony, any last words from you? And Ben, we really want to know about the SOSV Climate Tech Summit that you're plugging here. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that as well.
Yeah. Well, first, I'll answer the question first. I think, generally, cold emails are a waste of time. And some of the panelists already described some ways to get warmer intros. So an intro from a VC who doesn't invest in the company is not as good as an intro from a VC who at least accepted to follow, if not lead. But it's already something. An intro from as was mentioned also, from a portfolio company that ideally is doing well is great. An intro from a founder who already made money to an investor through an exit is even maybe better. And I think another thing that's an important tactic for startups is to actually try to get on the radar of investors using media and public events. Because investors pay attention to what's going on. And if they already heard about you before getting a connection to you, that increases your chances of getting their attention. So those are kind of my quick tips on that. And yeah, since I'm plugging this event that we're working on, so we're hosting our first Climate Tech Summit in a couple of weeks. It's free, it's online, and you can see we have a pretty good panel of participants and speakers. And this is particularly for early stage climate tech founders and investors who are interested in the sector.
Will there be opportunities for participants to network with each other or investors to network with each other?
Yes, so it's hosted on Hopin, so there's a few networking features there, and there'll be plenty of learning if you're looking for investors or co-investors or partners or learning from founders who've already built successful companies.
Legit, thank you. Tony, final closing words.
With regards to stage and introductions, I think everything has been said. What we are doing, and I think it can be interesting for certain companies, especially in their pursuit to grow cross-border, is working with locally significant corporate partners to help growth through their distribution channels, and by securing the first contracts, ideally the first clients in a new geography. And let me also plug one of our activities here, which is the Carbonless Asia Challenge. It's an innovation challenge. We're working with Hong Kong's public transport operator around an innovation challenge which is decarbonization related, where technology companies can apply and get direct access to MTRs, not only Hong Kong based operations but global operations. So that's kind of how we roll also through our investment activities. We work very closely with regional and global players that can be extremely relevant for startups. We work with growth stage startups, so and we make it very clear. So we are specialized in helping great companies grow into new markets, and that's how we would like to be known, and we invest some effort to be known as such. So hopefully, this message gets across, and we are very open for cold emails as well, and because we have had some good experiences along those lines. But obviously, everything that has been said before is rings very, very true.
Cool. All right. Well, I just want to thank the panelists again for taking the time out. I want to thank the audience for making this happen, and also the Asia Berlin Summit organizers for really putting together like an amazing panel. I had a lot of fun. I hope everyone else did too.
Yeah, thank you.
Happy to do this.
Thank you.
The next.